When you dare to share, you break the silence. When you dare to share, you speak your truth. When you dare to share, you use the full strength of your voice. When you dare to share, it brings opportunity to own your story. So tell it, be heard, and at the same time, your sharing is someone else's learning, inspiration, motivation, empowerment, and hope. There's always an element to each of our stories that remains a secret. For some, we feel it's a dirty little secret. Dare to share your untold story exposes these secrets in a welcoming and positive way. I encourage each of you out there to dare yourself to share what is yours to tell. When we dare, it is the courage to do something really important. Let this be a vow to each and every single one of us that we take risk, we brave, confront, and face what is, while inspiring and empowering all communities. So let's break that silence and tap into mental beauty. This is Salima Jadavji, your podcast host, a practicing clinical social worker, and your mental wellness connoisseur. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast, episode number 15, Resiliency and Thriving, a multi-part journey through grief, ill health, and violence. To all my fellow listeners, before we get started, I'm just dropping in a note to give you a heads up that this podcast might be emotionally triggering for you. We do invite guests onto the show who share openly about extremely difficult life moments with exposure and impact of what the struggles have been like. The intensity of each episode could have a variable impact on your emotional and mental well-being based on your own personal story. If at any point the topic becomes uncomfortable or upsetting to you in any way, please do not pressure yourself to listen. Instead, be kind to yourself, do some self-care, and perhaps give another episode a try. Today, I introduce a brave and daring guest, Amy Sayed. Amy is a kinesiologist and rehab professional, and she is also a serial entrepreneur who believes significant impact can be made through intentional business concepts that foster resiliency and sustainability. She is the founder and CEO of findyourhcp.com and started Amy Sayed Enterprises Incorporated as the teaching arm of her business to teach others how to use their experiences and genius to create a successful business and career. Amy is the host of a podcast named Calm After the Storm and has been cast on The Social Movement, airing on Apple TV and Amazon Prime in 2022. Amy is a humanist and an advocate for the global protection and annihilation of violence against vulnerable women and children. Amy is a Canadian who is headquartered in Toronto. She lives with her 5 children and her partner, Amir. Hi, Amy. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to do this with you today and share my journey with your listeners.
Honestly, it's a pleasure to have you on the show, and I'm so thankful that you bring with you this willingness to share and for taking the stance to help break down barriers of mental stigma.
Absolutely. That's what I'm here for. I feel like the experiences that we have are not by accident. And if I can share my own journey to help someone out there, I'm happy to.
That's the spirit. I really, really like that you said not by accident. Yeah, there's a reason for things sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, Amy, just to share with you, this podcast is about bringing forward untold stories that people go through, whether directly about a mental health struggle or something else. And we also know that no matter what a person's story is, there is impact on one's own mental health in some way, and typically remaining tucked away. So this platform here is a way to break those barriers of mental stigma that have been conditioned in our society. And I know that we've come a long way in the journey of breaking stigma, but I also feel we have so much more to do. So our presence together, yours and mine, it's really to encourage people to share and tell what people typically have reservation for expressing. And of course, I'm putting forward a new trend. It's called the Mental Beauty Rethink. What are your thoughts about the Mental Beauty Rethink?
Oh my gosh, that sounds amazing. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. So as I was saying about, reconditioning society, I feel right now when we hear the words mental stigma, there's a negative connotation attached to it.
Yeah.
when you hear mental health, it's just kind of what pops up. I kind of did some surveying, just even from my own, there's just so many things that when we talk about this, that's the reactions and the judgments that I hear from other people that I witness and see.
Yeah, I find that to be so interesting because we deal with people on a daily basis. And I'd say more than half of the people that you're talking to or that you deal with in your daily lives are touched by mental health in one form or another. This doesn't have to be, a formal diagnosis per se, but I feel as though life happens, situations happen, and there are such things as situational anxiety and situational depression. And again, you may not have the diagnosis, which often is stigmatized. But you're right. A lot of people don't want to talk about the fact that, mental health does touch all of us.
Yes, it's absolutely true. And yeah, I'm really excited to see what this mental beauty rethink brings.
Me too.
So, do you feel good for us to start?
Absolutely.
All right, Amy's untold story, here we come. Okay, Amy, give us the newspaper headline of how you would title your untold story.
Woman survives terminal cancer to experience almost dying from domestic violence incident and lives to teach the world a lesson on forgiveness. So for me, I think that the one thing I didn't capture in my headline was sort of what kicked off everything that became turmoil in my life. And it started with an experience that I had with my father being diagnosed with stage 4 cancer when I was graduating high school. We found out that my father had stage 4 colorectal cancer. And this is something that I think in a lot of my healing journey, I know it kicked off a really tough time in my life. But in hindsight, I think it really set me up for a lot of the pains and trials and tribulations I dealt with afterwards. My
Mm-hmm.
father and I were very close. He was very involved in my life and my sister's lives. And I think he was really the first feminist male that I ever knew in my life. So I really looked up to him and we had a very close and loving relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So learning about his cancer was hard. Watching him go through the ups and downs of the cancer was even worse. And I think at the end, when he was close to death, he was at home and we were taking care of him through home care and personally. And that experience itself really set me up for feeling this depth of grief even before I lost him, let alone after I lost him. So the moment when I lost him, I was actually holding him in my hands and I felt it all. And, that moment is imprinted in my mind. And, you think now it's been 21 years since that incident happened, but it's still such a profound moment in my life. And following grief, it's so hard to make sense of what your world looks like because the lens in which you look at that world has changed forever.
Mm-hmm.
So I think at that point, it was like I was young, I was very lost. I threw myself into perfectionism as a response to the extreme grief I was feeling. So the more grief I felt, the more perfect I became. And, I was on a board of directors at the Cancer Society. I was in school full time and university. I was working almost full time. It's actually kind of crazy when I think back to the stress that I was putting on myself, hardly sleeping, had developed insomnia. And the only thing that I could really do was to keep going, right? And keep myself busy. I did, look for therapy at the time. I knew that the grief was so bad in moments that I needed the support. And I had a couple of really great grief therapists that helped me through parts of it. But the therapy often turned into the uncomfortable, right? Which is telling you that, you need to face your mom and you need to face your family and you need to face the feelings of injustice that you have, right? And that was very hard because I used to always think, well, the person who would make me feel better was my father and he's no longer here. And so I often kind of recoiled when they told me to face it, right? And I just threw myself into something else. So I was doing all these different things, and almost a decade went by with me in that state of mind of just basically running and trying to fleet that feeling of emptiness.
Right. I mean, it sounds like when you talk about the recoiling and you talk about keeping yourself busy, it sounds like the distraction was what was getting you through that part of grief.
It did. And, there's moments where you feel guilty because, I mean, that's a natural part of being a caregiver to somebody who dies of a terminal disease. You have moments of guilt. And again, it's like almost a panic moment of guilt because you're like, I can't even go back and say sorry to him. I don't even know if he can hear me or not. Right.
Right.
And these feelings of guilt, I learned later in life that are very normal and part of your grief and part of your journey. And so those feelings of guilt kind of created this experience of almost self-sabotage, like you're kind of setting yourself up for failure, even though you're working so hard to be perfect, because you have this cycle of guilty feelings and sadness and situational depression almost, right? That's happening all at the same time. The moments of stillness that I experienced back then were very few. I eventually ended up moving out when I was 25. And I remember being by myself and like literally leaving for long runs. I was like in the best fitness of my life inadvertently because I was running all the time and, running and working out and just taking the subway and going downtown to get away from my feelings and my thoughts. I found it to be normal back then, right? When in hindsight, I now think, wow, that was a really exhausting way to live.
I mean, it sounds like definitely exhausting when you explain all the different things that were part of running, and then you actually took up running, right? What a metaphor
Yes.
for your life, how that unfolded. But it also sounds like you were doing the best that you could. That is what you knew to do, and it was the only way that you knew. And so it was too scary to try something different.
Yeah. And I mean, I was really in the middle of all of it in this nurturing field, knowing, for others what was going wrong, but not listening to myself in terms of what was wrong with me. And so you're right. I didn't really know any better, but I kind of knew better. I just didn't apply it to myself.
Yeah, it's the theme of denial, right? Convincing
Yeah.
yourself perhaps that no, this isn't really happening. And I know how to take care of myself and I'm doing all these
Mhm.
right things. So if you tell yourself, well, I'm eating well, I'm running, I'm doing all these things, it's fine. That's nonsense. Like if you paid attention to any part of that small voice that was kind of giving you some nudges,
Mhm.
perhaps that's how you responded.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Amy, I mean, that seems to uncover so much of the grief aspect of your journey. Do you feel comfortable sharing the other parts of your multi part journey?
Oh, absolutely. So basically, what ended up happening is in my late 20s, I met my first husband. I met him at work, and it was one of those relationships where things moved very quickly. So we got married, and shortly after we got married, there were a lot of red flags that were happening. In the moment, I think because of my situation, also because, at the end of the day, when you're in that situation, I think you just want to be loved, right? You're ready for the next chapter of your life. You're done with spending all that time grieving and second guessing yourself. I was at a point, I think, where my career was really taking off and life just seemed to be progressing the way it's supposed to be progressing. And I think for him, he was really in the right place at the right time. So it was a culmination of factors, but we did end up getting pregnant quite quickly. And during the pregnancy, I had a lot of complications. It was a really hard pregnancy. I ended up finding out I was pregnant with twins, which was a huge surprise.
Hmm.
But again, things don't happen by accident. Basically, I was pregnant and unhappy, and I saw my family doctor during that time, and she said, "What you're describing to me sounds like intimate partner violence, and it's probably going to escalate while you're pregnant because it always gets worse when someone's pregnant. So I want you to be careful. And she gave me like a safety kit. And I remember thinking, oh no, like there's no way that's going to happen. And I know things are bad, but maybe once I have the babies, he'll get better. And maybe he's just stressed out because I'm having twins, and making all the normal excuses that we make in those situations. So, and then of course the perfection kicked in.
Right.
So then I was like, the more perfect I am, the more he's going to love me. And, the more I do for the babies and for him, maybe that'll make him love me. And, you go into this, it's almost like a rabbit hole, right? Where you're trying your best to just be perfect at everything to avoid arguments and avoid challenges that come up, right? And there was a point I remember where I was so sick, like I was throwing up literally almost every day, being pregnant with the twins. And he's like, "Oh, you can't even put a smile on your face. You just look mad all the time. Who wants to be with a woman who looks mad all the time, right?" Just
Right.
simple things like even just your expression.
You didn't even have the right to
Um,
express.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, like who in their right mind can even fathom a smile? It's not even if they want to or not. Like when you're not well, you're not well. How do you force yourself to smile?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the reality of the situation, right? And it's small things like that that kind of hold you captive in your own home, right? Because you can't express your emotion. You can't bring people into the house that he doesn't like, which is usually everybody. You can't really bring your family into your home anymore because number one, they didn't like the way that he was treating me. And number two, they just didn't want to be there. But also, he was always, making an issue about everything that they would talk about or everything that was going on. So this went on for a while, and I had the twins. They were both healthy, and twins life is a very interesting life because with the twins I was a perfect fit, right? I trained myself for a decade to be busy all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I was ultimately, I was the right person to pick, right? To be a mom of twins because I very quickly was able to put them on their schedules and feed them at the same time and nap them at the same time and, create this entire system of outcomes for them. Meanwhile, with him, he decided not to go back to work after they were born because he knew that he could get half of my mat leave. And it basically went on from there. When they were 5 months old, I was diagnosed with cancer. That diagnosis, I think, because I was at a point in my life where I was so withdrawn in a way, like I was very, very involved and committed to the twins. But I think for myself, I had withdrawn from my emotions almost, right? To be able to provide for them. It was almost a robotic feeling that I was in. So when I received the diagnosis, I thought to myself, well, I'm supposed to go back to work when they're 6 months old. I'll just go back to work and I'll figure it out, right? And so I did. I went back to work. I tried to figure it out. And I think the biggest blow then was that they had prepared for a large layoff as a company. And in that layoff, they had laid me off too. And so this is a company I had been committed to for 5 years and really given them, my blood, sweat, and tears. And so I think that that moment of getting laid off from that company really brought to surface what I was feeling, which was panicked on the inside, right? Like, now what do I do? I can't even go back to work to avoid this treatment. I don't know what I should do about the treatment. And it's really interesting how you kind of, because you're in survival mode already, it's like now I have to deal with this other essence of what survival is going to look like.
Right.
So the first time I did the chemo, it was a 6 month chemo. I did 5 weeks of radiation. I tried to take it like a champ. And, I had these two little ones watching me, and they weren't even a year old when I started treatment. But they were really my guiding light because I would wake up every morning, no matter how I felt, and spend time with them. I actually got to spend a lot of time at home inadvertently because I wasn't working. I was doing treatment. And so I was there with them all of the time.
Right.
And, during that time, I really reevaluated everything that was going on around me and what was going on between me and him. And little by little, I was trying to make a plan for myself. And of course, you're going through these cycles, right, of domestic violence where you feel like things are getting better. And although there's no real physical abuse, there's a lot of verbal and emotional abuse going on. And when it gets better, you think, okay, maybe he's changed because he's really sorry. And then you're back at it again. And it's just, the cycle that would sometimes take 2 or 3 months was becoming shorter and shorter and shorter. Right. And so during that time, I really was trying to find myself and find my footing while providing for the girls. And after the cancer experience, I actually returned to work and I went to a colonoscopy that was booked for me about a week afterwards. They were calling my phone down, and I was thinking, they're probably just calling me because they want me to go back and see the doctor. And I wasn't really answering the phone. And then eventually they called his phone and they told him that, she really needs to give us a call back because something came up from her, from the biopsies that we did from her colon. And that's when I found out I had a very rare form of cancer that was highly malignant. And they basically told me that we're not sure what stage you're at right now. We've got to do more tests, but we're suspecting that this is metastasized, right, to your liver. So at that point, I think that in hindsight, I was so blown away by that diagnosis. And it was just so devastating
Mm-hmm.
because I just kept thinking to myself, I'm not leaving these kids, right? I'm not leaving them to anyone. And I know we're going to be okay. And I kept telling myself, I know, like I visualized it. I've written about it in my journal. I know that we're going to be okay. And my plan was really to go back to work and save up my money and figure out a way to exit that relationship. So if this happens, like I can't do it, right? How am I going to do it?
Let me ask a question. So you seemed so confident, so certain that it's going to be okay. What
Mhm.
do you what did you tap into to really so confidently know that you were going to be okay? Like what was helping you feel that way, or what contributed to that?
Denial.
Denial.
Yeah. I mean, I think at that point, before the diagnosis, I was just trying to survive and figure my way right through this like forest, this darkness, you could say. But once I had the diagnosis, I just told myself that it's not right. Like it's not real. Nothing's going to happen to me. Right. And I denied it. And in hindsight, I think that that actually helped me quite a bit. I started to see my body as my enemy, right? I started to see my body as something I couldn't trust, but it allowed me to create enough dissociation, which I don't know if it worked in my favor or not at the time, but it created enough dissociation where I could say, look, I know I'm going to be okay. And I'm going to deny this, right, to myself in my mind. And I know that at that point, when I was seeing, I had an oncologist that I was assigned to, and I know I went to go see her, and I'm sure she thought that I had like lost my marbles because she's telling me, all these truths about how sick you are, and these are the outcomes of your type of cancer, and these are the options that you have, and this is what it looks like for you. And I remember telling her that it doesn't matter what you say because I have no choice. I have to live, right? I've got these kids and I have to live, so it doesn't matter, right? I'll just do whatever I have to do to make it work. So that experience kind of became this mantra of denial I had in my head while I was physically going through, one chemo. It didn't work. It made me very ill. They had to take a break because my blood counts dropped so quickly. Then a second chemo that was basically my last choice here in Toronto that also resulted in, adverse side effects that were not helping. And I remember taking the second chemo, and that was the first time I thought, if I continue doing this, I may not live, right? Because I was so sick. And back then, like Google wasn't as established as it is now, but I still sat there and I Googled, right? I joined like support groups online and anything that I could find. And I started to open up my mind to what the possibilities were. And because my body became my enemy, my mind became my friend. So I started to feed my mind and look at the all of the things I learned in school, and I knew about how your brain functions in this miraculous way. And I used to tell myself, we don't know that much about the brain, so I can just try anything and maybe I'll find a solution to my problem through my brain. And so I almost became obsessive about neuroplasticity and understanding how neural pathways are formed and how, your thoughts can heal you. And that started taking me on this journey of realization, right? And a true journey on looking in the mirror. And I remember standing in front of the mirror one day and looking at myself and staring at my eyes. And I saw, it was like tunnel vision into this pain that I had. And I didn't realize it was there. I didn't realize it had been there for many years, even probably before my father had been diagnosed and died, right? It makes you who you are. It's all your experiences, the culmination of all your pains, right? And so I remember thinking in that moment that, you know what, I've only touched the tip of the iceberg. I haven't looked at all these things. I haven't admitted to myself what my own role has been in my own demise. And this isn't to say that, I had committed to destroying myself, but it's the realization that sometimes we do things that are self sabotage, right? We do things that hurt us sometimes because we really believe that voice inside our mind that says you don't deserve it, or who are you to deserve it,
It's not intentional. It's
No.
certainly not intentional. And sometimes you believe it so strongly that that's your truth at that moment. But perhaps it's
Of
not your core
course.
truth, right?
Of
It's
course.
the cover up truth, and it's in disguise. So you don't know. So you didn't know, but that day in the mirror told you something else.
Yeah. And that day in the mirror, I remember looking at my eyes and thinking, there's like a whole history behind me, right? And I need to get to the bottom of it. And I feel like those were the moments that really helped me understand, right? Myself
Mm-hmm.
and what I needed to do for myself, right? What self love would look like. So, what I found to be really interesting then is things started coming out of the woodwork. I found this book that wrote about all of these people who had survived terminal cancer and had survived 2 or 3 bouts of cancer. And I read about them and I took notes, and I still have the book. And it basically all culminated at this institute in Atlanta. So I decided I'm going to go there, and I went there and I met all these other people who were dealing with terminal cancer. And, it was not only the community, but it was also learning how to do a raw food diet, learning how to feed your soul, learning how to, like what therapies work for you. And I will do anything to survive. So I did it all. Basically, the book was just a culmination of stories of hope, right? It helped me with this journey. And as I went through those movements and figuring out what to do physically, mentally, emotionally, I started to realize that a huge part of me did not forgive. It didn't forgive what I experienced with my father. It didn't forgive the people who did me wrong as I grew up, right? There were things that were coming up for me as I actually started therapy where I wanted to know. I wanted to know what's inside me, what's causing these feelings, right? What is it that's held me back? What are my blocks? And in those moments, I was learning so much about, my experiences and how they've impacted how I felt and how I ended up in the situation that I was in. So, as I went through all of this, I also realized that the relationship I was in was so toxic, right? And that the individual that I decided to share my life with has his own pain and his own journey and his own thoughts and feelings about what life should look like. And it was clashing with mine, right? And so I decided that I think it's better that we go our separate ways, and I'm not going to wait anymore. I'm not going to wait to get better. I'm not going to wait to see what the outcomes are going to be. I just want this to end, right? And I really at that point wanted the peace of silence sometimes, right? The peace of a peace of mind in your own home, where your home is your sanctuary, not somewhere that you're afraid of going to. And so in that conversation, it actually turned into an assault. He assaulted me in front of the children, and the children were witness to it.
Was that the first time that he physically assaulted you?
Yeah, at that level, yes. He had done other things in the past, like grabbed me by my wrists or grabbed me by my neck, but he hadn't done what he did that day. No way. And so that really was a strange, eye-opening experience, because it it's traumatizing for sure, right? To go through something like that. But in the moment you're thinking, well, I'm a fighter, I'm a survivor. I'm just going to get the kids out of the house and I'm going to get out of this situation, which is what I ended up doing.
You were so focused on your goal. You were very clear of your goal.
Yeah. But what came of that was, another challenge, you could say, a challenge in, dealing with what you feel afterwards, because you feel guilty again, right? Even though you're the one that's assaulted, you feel bad. You're like, oh, well, what are my kids going to do if their dad ends up staying in jail or gets convicted? And what am I going to do with, all these situations? What am I going to tell them? The kids used to cry for him, right? Because they don't know what's going on. And it was an interesting time for sure, because, again, my conscious mind knew this is all wrong and that it's not ever anything that my family would have supported. My father, in fact, was a sergeant with Toronto Police Services and worked with a lot of women in the Southeast Asian culture who were victims of domestic and intimate partner violence. And I remember him telling us growing up, right, how important it is to have our own money and have our own career and not depend on our partners, as well, what the limits are and what red flags look like. And so I also felt bad that I let my dad down. And I remember telling that to the police officers when I told them about what happened to me. And I remember telling that to anybody who would listen, that I can't believe I ended up in this situation, but I had. And so, Salima, you end up having to really deal with your own demons again, right? Again, it started with me. It started with really understanding, why was I in that situation to begin with? What did that situation really mean? And because I was in it for so long, you don't realize the impact it's actually having on your psyche, but it does. It has a very big impact on your psyche. And the longer you're with an individual who acts like that, who is a perpetrator of that level of abuse, you start to believe that it's a normal way of living, right? You make excuses and you end up staying in it. And so I think it was at a point when I decided to do the group counseling with the children, and it was like a mom and children's group, that I started to really learn that my guilt shouldn't be there, and that I need to be strong for the children and for myself, and how to truly love yourself. And I remember back then starting with telling the girls that, who does mommy love? And they would say, oh, you love Maya and Aaliyah. And I'd say, yeah, but who does mommy love first? And they'd say, you love yourself first. And I said, yeah, exactly. And you need to do that too, because it was just a profound realization, right? That I had never been putting myself first. I had continued to put others ahead of me. And so when that turning point happened, I think that the clarity just became more of a narrative in my life. And, it's been more than a decade since that period of my life. And I feel like I've come out of it. It's a 180. I've got 5 beautiful children now. I've got a little one with my new partner who's super supportive, puts me, really on a pedestal, and really we work in a joint relationship where he respects me and I respect him, and we speak about everything. We talk about everything. And sometimes I'm sure he thinks it's like over communication, but it's so fulfilling, right? It feeds my soul, and the children feel it too. But whenever, I have moments still of, it's almost like a PTSD situation where you dream about it, right? So you'll have a dream here and there. You'll dream about being sick again and being, feeling like, oh my gosh, I've got the cancer again, or feeling like, oh no, am I still in that situation that I was in so many years ago, with my ex-partner.
Well, there are two kinds of danger, right? Like the cancer is one form of danger, right? Like my health is at risk.
Yeah.
and being in the amount of violence and domestic situation that you were in with, and that's also a threat. Like, you were walking on eggshells,
Yeah.
day in and day out. Like, people, as you say, go to their home and it's their sanctuary. For you,
Yeah.
you weren't sure if you could even close your eyes for a second.
Yeah, exactly. So it was almost like you're hostage in your home, in your environment, and you're hostage in your body.
I know you said that your family, like, they didn't even like him or approve of him. And so that was already like, those were already people in that category of, I can't bring anyone home that he doesn't like, so, or that don't like him, so we can't kind of do that. But at any point, did they ever know about what you were experiencing on the inside? Did they ever have clues? Did you ever say anything?
They knew that I was unhappy because every weekend I'd end up at my mom's house. So I used to get the kids in the car on Friday and we'd drive there and we'd stay there till Sunday night. And that was really what I did, especially when I was going through cancer and the treatments and all of that, right? They knew that I wasn't happy. I think that for them, particularly my mom, it was really, what do we do to help you at this point, right? And she used to often do that. Like, she would help me financially. She would help me by letting me come to her home. But for her to come to my house or to have a discussion with him, she wouldn't. And I think that was really because I wasn't really letting her either, right? Like, I was like, no, 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 we don't want to talk about it. No, 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 I don't know what he's going to do if he finds out I've talked to someone about it,
Right. Like, it was off the tables for you, like, in your thought
Yeah.
process. You're like, oh goodness, no, that would not go well.
Yeah, and then I think what I tried to do at that point was I did try to go to his family, but his family, I guess being who they are, really thought that, I mean, how bad is it really? Probably, right? Given their own experiences. Minimizing it or saying, well, there was a couple points where they were like, well, do you want us to talk to him or do you want us to do something? And then I was like, I don't think so, because I would just think about, what are the repercussions of that conversation? So it was one of those things where I feel like as though when you're in the depths of it, it's really hard to find a road out of it, right?
Right. You're always worrying about
Because
the repercussions.
you're worrying about the repercussions, you're worried about your kids.
As you said, it's survival mode, right? So your choice points is, what is the lesser of two evils? So it's got to be the thing that I know versus the thing that I don't know what the outcome's going to be.
Yeah, and I think deep down inside, I always knew that if I end up leaving or if he finds that I'm telling people that this is going on, he's going to kill me, right? Or he's going to hurt me really badly. That it's not going to occur to him that the kids are in the house, which is what ended up happening. Um, and I knew the repercussions of childhood trauma because I've dealt with adults who are the result of their trauma, right? Who've had challenges in their life, and it's resulted in severe mental health challenges for them. So for me, it was really this holistic approach and understanding that anything that I do, even inadvertently, don't mean to do, it could really harm them, if not physically, then mentally.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It wasn't even just worrying about you.
Yeah.
You were looking out for your girls as
Yeah.
well, right? You were really looking out for them.
Hmm.
So, is there any other part of your story that we have not uncovered? I mean, it feels like there's been so many intricate parts to your story and so many important details that you've highlighted.
Hmm.
Was there any other parts to your story that we haven't heard about yet?
No, I mean, I think that ultimately, my inkling to really start to talk about it and appear on podcasts and really, talk about it publicly with people out there was to give people the forum or the confidence to allow themselves to feel their experience matters, because it does, right? And oftentimes, because of shame, because of our own inclination to be different, we don't share it. And when we're not sharing it, we're taking away that experience that somebody else can have in building their own confidence in sharing it. So I do speak quite openly about my experience in order to help others, but also it's been healing for me. And, it's interesting because I had the twins, and I'll tell you, they always had each other. So after I finished all the chemo, I was told that I was infertile and, I went through the divorce and they always had each other. They would go together when they visited him. They would hurt together. They would love together. They would laugh together. And they were like each other's built in best buddies, right?
Mhm.
And given what they've been through and the experiences they've had, it's been a huge blessing, right? That they've had each other at that level. So yeah, I mean, I'm a firm believer in the fact that things don't happen by accident, right? There's a purpose to everything. It just takes a while for us as humans to recognize it.
Right. Absolutely. Honestly, your story has been so incredible to hear, and just you sharing, having gone through all of that domestic turmoil and the grief and the cancer journey, everything that you've shared, and even walking us through some of the steps that you took that led you to letting your guard down, to show that much vulnerability, to be able to trust in a relationship again, a new relationship. That takes courage. That's daring.
No, it does. But I'll tell you something. I realized through my healing journey that if I don't try again, right? If I don't go out there and just give it my all, then I'm just as good as I was before all this happened. Right. And so for me, it was really, really important to allow myself to be out there and put myself out there, dating and talking to men because I knew I had this role model in my mind of my father, and I knew men are good and there's good and bad everywhere, right? Just like in women, just like everywhere in the world. So I wanted to be able to trust myself again, to be in a relationship with somebody and trust somebody else. And I used to keep this list of my ideal partner
Mm-hmm.
in my bedside table drawer, and I'd write all the things that would come to mind, like I want him to be caring. I want him to listen. I want him to know about world politics, I want him to be a conversationalist so that we grow old together and we're able to talk to each other about things that matter. And when I met my partner, it was really funny. I forgot about the list and I was so, in the depths of this relationship with him. When I was moving out of that house and moving in with him, I found that list. And, it's so remarkable how so many of those traits are actually in him. And it's almost like I attracted it into my life.
Yeah.
And I tell people this all the time, especially when they're down and out about, dating and trying to find a partner and, the feelings that they have about hesitation and trust, that if you can trust yourself, right, to know what you want, trust your clarity,
Yes.
then you'll know when the person is right that you meet out there.
I believe that when you fully trust yourself, that's when you have the utmost emotional clarity. So if you have that, it's so clear that nothing else can sort of derail you.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that happened for you. So we're probably a little late in the game to ask this, but I still want to ask because I ask everybody. When people come to see me as a therapist, they're typically in one of three places in their work, their emotional work. And, some are getting started, some are in the middle, some are looking back. And given everything that you've shared with us today, where would you say you are? Would you say you're looking back, or are you in the middle? Are you getting started?
I think that it's fair to say that I'm looking back on that portion of the journey,
Okay.
but I am just getting started with the next evolution of my life.
So one chapter is closed and another one's starting.
Yeah, I feel like, we're always growing, we're always learning. I find that I'm just shedding this exterior again. It's kind of like I'm going through another evolution and leaving this, old shell behind. And I'm excited. I'm excited to see what the future holds and, what I'm going to be able to do with it, with all this newfound knowledge.
That is such a fascinating way of saying it, shredding
Mhm.
the all those layers, the old shell.
Yeah.
I love it. So Amy, what's your key message to the listeners of our show?
So, my key message, there's a quote that I really love that I'm going to read to you. And it goes like this: I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And that's by Maya Angelou. I really want people to know that we are all feeling humans. And the more we try to repress those feelings, the more we try to push through, the busier we are out there, the harder it is to really allow yourself to lift other people up, right? Because everything starts with us. So I do really encourage people to look in the mirror. And I mean, really stand there, look in the mirror, look into your eyes, and appreciate your experience.
Absolutely. I always talk about getting a little comfortably uncomfortable, right? So, same
Hmm.
idea. Any other messages to the listeners?
No, I just want to thank you, Salima. I love what you're doing with this show. I think it's so needed. And I really love the aspect of destigmatizing mental health. Be aware, right? Be aware that your challenges make you who you are, but they also hurt, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in understanding that hurt and the pain lies the beauty in the healing. And so for you to heal from something, you have to acknowledge it. And, we're all going through something. I mean, even if you're not diagnosed, you're.
Yeah, it's not about the diagnosis. It's about the experience, as you said, and
Mhm.
everything that culminates it. And if we can sort of approach it with openness and curiosity, we can dive in and learn a lot about ourselves.
Oh, yeah. About ourselves, about others, right?
It's everything put together.
Yeah, it's a combination of things. And so I find it so interesting whenever they talk about, diversity and inclusion, because I'm like, well, you can learn all you want about the superficial characteristics that make a human, but what about the human themselves, right? What about what's behind that exterior? What's behind all of those labels? And it's really an understanding of the human condition.
Absolutely. So I have a couple other quick questions for you.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to ask is if there was a cause or an organization that has been impactful to you on your journey that you'd want to give a shout out to.
Yes, I've never used their services, but I've met my dear friend Neka McGregor, who is the founder and executive director of Women at the Center. She's doing amazing work out there advocating for women who are survivors of domestic violence, providing them with the supports that they need to leave a relationship and stay away from that relationship. She has been very involved in policy influence out there, and she does some amazing work. And she actually recently, also along with two other amazing women, has obtained a $2.5 million grant from the government to help Black women who are survivors of domestic violence. So she is a dear friend, but I love what she's doing with Women at the Center.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. What a great organization. It's so great that it has come to fruition and there is a resource like this for women. I'm sure you know firsthand that something like that would be so invaluable.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And so, Amy, how can people connect with you if they want to? How are you findable? Someone wants to connect with you, maybe share their story or pick your brain about something.
Yeah. So people can connect with me on social. I am actually on Instagram and Facebook. I'll share my handles with you. You can also visit amysayed.ca. That's my website.
Okay,
You can check me out there, and you can also see some of the work that I've done.
that's excellent. We will get those handles from you and we will make sure that everything is visible for the listeners and for anyone else who's looking for that information. So, Amy,
Mhm.
congratulations. You dared yourself to share.
Thanks, Salima. And you know what? Thank you for letting me share here.
My goodness, Amy, I'm so thankful for your readiness, that the readiness, you just dived right in. And let me just say, this was truly a raw conversation where you literally unfolded all aspects of what you have moved through and overcome, and really letting listeners know how you changed your trajectory, that your, journey with cancer, you've surpassed that and you're no longer a victim in that home, and that your family structure perhaps is now more restored. So
Mhm.
thank you so much for sharing all of that, every single part.
Thank you, Salima, and keep doing what you're doing. It's so needed.
Thank you. Once again, Amy, thank you for being a part of Dare to Share Your Untold Story and helping to be a voice in breaking down the barriers of mental stigma. To all of our listeners, if you like what you've been hearing on this podcast and you want to be part of breaking down barriers of mental stigma, I invite you to go wherever you are listening to the episode and hit subscribe. Leave us a comment or a review of the episode and maybe how you relate to it. To learn more about what we offer, visit www.daretoheal.co. And if you are feeling ready and brave to share, please submit your story by visiting www.daretoshare.co. Thanks for joining in.